Saturday is a big day for restaurants, coffee shops, breweries, wineries, because the new public health order will allow indoor dining at 25% of fire code capacity. Churches and house of worship get a bump from 25 to 40% too. The governor made the announcement Wednesday after a string of days in which New Mexico saw its case counts, its deaths and hospitalizations decrease. She warned, however, that, quote, our progress is only as good as our willingness to stay the course, end quote. And Dan, clearly a nod there to the fact that we tried this once and didn't go well. Will it stick this time? How do you think we'll do?
Yeah, I think it's tough to predict. I mean, I think clearly we've been trending in a positive direction, and there's pressure on the governor to kind of ease up on some of the restrictions. But I don't think there's a magic formula here. You know, as you mentioned, the last time we kind of loosened some restrictions, then case numbers increased again. I do think, you know, with the unemployment rate having increased last month, that probably also ratcheted up some pressure. So I think they're trying to kind of slowly turn the knob, as Secretary Scrace would say, but I think it's unclear, you know, whether that can be done responsibly and kind of slowly enough to help some of these restaurants and businesses out economically, but still kind of keep the spread at a low rate.
Laura, interestingly, when you think about it, there was an outbreak in Lee County as we track the numbers, and Lee County, as you know, had thumbed its nose at masks and, you know, indoor dining bans and everything else. How does the governor balance opening things versus how everyone sees it should be done if they are governor, as a matter of fact? How does the governor approach this kind of thing?
Very delicately, I think. Yeah. I think, you know, that southeastern part of the state is always sort of on the bubble about being, you know, treated as being part of sort of Santa Fe and the Santa Fe machine, right, if you will. Like they always, and having represented a municipality in that part of the state, I understand how, you know, independent they are and how in many ways they feel compelled. I mean, they feel in many ways culturally a relevance to Texas. I mean, they go to Texas for their, you know, medical issues. A lot of times they go to Midland, Odessa, or, you know, Lubbock or somewhere else to get medical care. And so for them, those, you know, lines, those political lines of Texas versus New Mexico are blurred a lot more than they are for the rest of us. And that's just a fact of life down there. So I think for many of them, they saw the governor's approach as being very different from what they were seeing as reasonable. And they were not seeing as many cases. And so they in some situations weren't taking it as seriously as I think people in Albuquerque and Santa Fe were taking it with the mask wearing and all of that. But now we see the result of that potentially is this surge. So I think it's important that the governor and her people be delicate and not sort of be, I told you so about their approach with that region, because that will just further inflame a bad situation. But I think they're doing what they need to do, which is to encourage contact tracing, to encourage people to be well informed about what they need to do to protect themselves, to really be vigilant about that, and really to try to reach out to them with more information to try to overcome where they're headed right now, which is really troubling given their sparse population. So, for example, there was just in Ruidoso, there's a McDonald's with 13 cases. That's huge for one employer, let alone, you know, a place like McDonald's that potentially serves a lot of people who are traveling through the area. That could really be a serious thing for an infection like this to spread.
Laura Sanchez, I'm going to stay with you for one more and get the other guys in on this too. But since you're the attorney on our panel, I'm curious your sense of where the Supreme Court came down on Wednesday. It seems pretty definitive to me. Nothing's really ever settled, but how did you hear the final ruling on this? Am I missing something here? It seemed pretty definitive as I was listening.
Well, so procedurally, just to kind of go back a little bit,
please.
This was filed at a time when, you know, we had been opened at 50% capacity indoor for dining, and then it got shut down based on a resurgence of cases. That was in July, and then this case was filed soon after that. And the basis of the challenge really was that they were arguing that there wasn't enough data to support an approach on health, on a health basis, a public welfare basis, to shut down businesses like this, that it was really causing an economic impact, and that was the harm that they were causing. So it's really an argument that government is overstepping their bounds and causing an economic or potentially like a property value to go down that they have a right to. So that was the sort of the legal argument. The Supreme Court initially basically agreed with the temporary restraining order, and then this hearing that happened this week was to determine a permanent injunction, which would have been a permanent sort of banning of the governor's ability to close down in indoor dining. To a certain extent, it's the impact of the ruling is lessened because the health orders have now been changed so that this weekend everything will be able to open back up, everything being restaurants, to 25% capacity indoor. So the practical effect of this is somewhat is not as important necessarily as it had been before when it was shut down completely. But I think legally speaking, it's still an important outcome because it validates the governor's ability to make these kinds of broad sweeping executive orders for the public welfare. And so in that sense, I think you're going to see other potential industries, if they have a problem with the way the governor's approaching this, they're going to be hard pressed to be able to win at the Supreme Court level. And then of course we saw that Steve Pierce and other Republicans saying, well, here's an example of why people should get out and vote and try to, vote the bums out, meaning the Supreme Court. But interestingly enough, Judith Nakamura is a Republican appointed Chief Justice or Justice. So it isn't a political issue. When it comes to members of the judiciary, and particularly the Supreme Court, they're looking at jurisprudence, they're looking at precedent, they're looking at the law. So it doesn't come down to, what's the letter after your name.
Gotcha.
It comes down to what's the letter of the law.
Lana, has the outspoken Republican opposition to this been, the health order, I should say, the public health order, has it been a political winner or a political loser? Meaning, are they losing on this short term or winning, or long term, is this winnable? What's your sense of where the GOP is coming from on this?
No, I think it depends, what happens with the numbers, and people are fickle on this. And I think it depends where you live. I think a lot of it depends where you live. If you're in a rural area and you're not seeing very many cases, you don't understand why there's a one state policy. And so, I think that's, I think it's complicated. I think there's a lot of people in sort of these southern districts, in these rural areas in particular, who probably aren't very happy with how things have gone with the COVID orders. And, they're not part of Albuquerque and Santa Fe, as Laura talked about. And I think that, maybe the one straight strategy has been a difficult strategy for them in particular.
Dan, same question. Is this, you can make anything political in this world. You can make anything you want to political. But as Lana and Laura just sort of spelled out, there's a built-in opposition that's there. And they're going to vote for this governor or somebody else for governor at some point. Could this be a problem for her down the road?
I think some of the, it could kind of highlight some of those already tensions between urban and rural parts of the state, that Laura talked about. I think those are already there. And I think this might be exacerbating some of that. I do think, obviously, this playing out in an election season, that's given it even more of a kind of political hue. It would probably be political anyhow, but even more so. I do think, though, kind of, philosophically, too, it's just highlighting differences. This is the latest court case. Governor's faced a string of lawsuits, and she's prevailed in all of them. So I do think looking forward to maybe expect some discussion at the legislature next year about these emergency powers laws and whether they need to be changed or reined in. And I think that's where kind of we're going to see this go next. Yeah.
Laura Sanchez, just got a little bit of time on this one, but we're headed into the holidays in a couple of months, certainly. Schools might be more likely to return. It's going to be winter. There's a lot of things to think about here, and we'll be indoors. Do you think we're just bound for more trouble, and the governor's sort of thinking about it that way, saying, look, we've got holidays coming up. People are going to be traveling, getting together. Even January could be a big mess when you really think about it. Is that where the governor's head's at? Well, if you were the governor right now, is that what you would be thinking about?
Certainly, yeah. I think anybody, in terms of a prudent approach to dealing with this problem, you have to be thinking ahead at all times. And I think that's a big part of what the thinking is. Of course, I think the governor also has a very difficult job in that she needs to listen to her advisors, right? She needs to listen to the doctors that are involved in this, but she also needs to be concerned about the reality of the economy, balancing that approach. And the fact that people, I think, we're still seeing 100-degree days. We're still seeing some really, really hot temperatures here in Albuquerque and certainly in the rest of the state. So because of that, it's unrealistic to expect people to be able to go out to eat and sit out in the hot sun or even under a tent and have it be comfortable in any way. So it will be a gradual approach to try to figure out how to get the economy going. And then I think that the holidays, we're going to see a very different holiday season, I think, this year than we've seen in the past, and also a very different legislative session. So once we get past the election, a lot of those issues about how the legislature is going to function or not are going to come to light. And it will be very interesting to see sort of what kind of all hands on deck approach our leaders take.
Interesting. That's a great last note. Really want to I appreciate that. And thanks to everyone for keeping track of everything through a whirlwind news week. And Dan, thank you for your reporting, no doubt.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Now, throughout the pandemic, we've been keeping an eye on homelessness. Many of you know about the moratorium on evictions, but that's not the whole story. Once more, here's NMIF's Megan Kemrick with line panelist and housing advocate Serge Martinez and Chuck Sheldon, a longtime landlord and apartment owner.